You know, I get here and I listen to Max Thornsberry. Very impressed with the guy, always have been. And he speaks so well and he's so well researched. And then they bring up another guy and he's the same way, Eric Nelson. And I think, well, what is a guy like me doing here? And I'm going to tell you why I'm here. I've sit and watched people that I thought were far more intelligent than I am, and they do the wrong things. And I kind of wonder sometimes if the connection is lost between what's right and what's not right. Max brought out the religious aspects of it, and I've always been pretty outspoken on where I stand with Christ. And the sheep people, a lot of them are the same way. They're the same as you out there. There's a lot of us that we look at the Bible and we say, this isn't happening. And this isn't what our country was founded on. But anyhow, getting back to the sheep deal, I decided, well, what am I going to do to make the sheep situation clear to the people here? First of all, you got to know what you're talking about, and I don't. But I decided to go to that darn computer and get a few statistics. And I think the statistics tell a lot of the story. In 1956, the United States reached its peak number of sheep. We had about 56 million head of ewes, lambs, all sheep in the United States at that time. Today, we look around and we have about 5.2 million sheep, lambs, everything. About 2.8 million breeding stock. In 1956, the state of South Dakota had as many sheep as we now have in the entire United States. And South Dakota and the surrounding states of Montana and Wyoming have always been big sheep producers. As a matter of fact, they still are. And 50-some% of the wool that is provided to the military comes from the Center of the Nation Wool Warehouse in Belfast, South Dakota. So that tells you that we've got a lot of good quality sheep around this area. And I think that statistic tells us a lot about where we should be headed. Now, along with that, Brad Ballinger spoke here a few years ago. He's from Australia. I was impressed with him, visited with him afterwards, and thought, this guy's on top of it. And so I thought, well, I ought to contact Brad and see what's happening in Australia. And his email wouldn't work for me. I got a hold of Rick Fox, and he graciously got a hold of Brad, and then we got in touch on some of these statistics. And one thing that I thought was interesting, in Newell Shipyard, which is kind of one that the USDA uses a lot to cite prices and so forth, on August 4th, they were citing the lamb prices, and I never did quite understand it, but some of the lighter lambs was cited at $1.48. The little bit heavier ones were $1.33. This compares to January, when them same lambs were selling for around $2.56 a pound. This is devastating to our sheep producers. Then I got to talking to Brad, and I got to looking at the statistics of where the imports lay. And I find that a lot of the Australian market started falling about 2 to 3 months earlier than what ours fell apart. And the imports started rising when I looked at the numbers. And it makes me wonder if they weren't using the imports from Australia to kill our market. Then we have sheep feeders that have lambs, and I suppose they still have them, that are way overweight. One thing the sheep industry fights that the cattle industry kind of doesn't is when them lambs get overweight, they're docked. And then if they get overage, they're put into the mutton category and they're docked again. And I can't imagine the loss that some of these people are going to have or already have had. So, you know, we gotta look at things a little bit. Then the next thing I looked at, I thought, well, I knew the imports were a large part of what we consume here in the United States. And Australian lamb, New Zealand lamb is high quality lamb. They've got good sheep over there. And so we're a little different in the cattle industry, whereas Venezuela, Brazil, many of these places at this time have low quality beef. But I've always said that the sheep thing is kind of a forerunner to what we're seeing in the cattle. And I see Brazil changing their herd. They used to have very low quality cattle. They're breeding them up. They're AI and more cattle than you can believe. They're improving their cattle. And in a very near future, we're going to be in direct competition with good quality cattle out of Brazil. This is going to make it difficult for us. And that's what we're experiencing in the sheep industry. I like the producers in Australia, New Zealand. I've talked to several of them. And one of the things I brought up to Brad, and I spoke out on that topic then, is I said, you know, Brad, I believe the Australian government ought to be taking care of you people in Australia. And I believe the American government, U.S. government, should be taking care of the people here in the United States. And that really resonated with Brad. He agreed entirely. You know, when we're importing 80% of the lamb we consume, it starts to make you wonder just what we should be doing. So 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know, Jadine, if you're going to put that, there we go. I put this resolution in place at RCAF here, and it needs a little modifying, I'll admit that now. But I wish one of our producers, Jim Johnson, pushed me to put this in place. And I think it's something that we ought to look at for the cattle industry as well. When our prices drop to the point we can't make anything, whether you use parity as a figure or something else, but I know I'm producing cattle that are I can't produce them for what I'm doing it. It's costing me money to raise a calf. That shouldn't be. Lamb deal, this year especially, last year we did pretty good, but this year it's kind of a disaster. And I don't know, we've got to put something in place where we protect our producers. I don't know, I can give you a lot more statistics. I know it's kind of dangerous throwing a lot of statistics out to people, but the variability, the change in the marketplace has really been disastrous in the sheep industry for years. They can go up and down so much in such a short time that it's really hard to compensate for it. I've run sheep, and right now I have none. My son-in-law has all the sheep, but I've been involved with sheep for many, many years. I sold my first bum lambs when I was 10 years old. I raised rabbits at that time too. So I was kind of a glutton for punishment even back then. But when I see the lamb prices, what they are, and then I look at what the retail price of lamb is, and this was really brought home to me in 2005. I went to Chicago on behalf of RCAF on the animal ID issue. And one of the things that I seen there was they served lamb at that meeting. The caterers served lamb. And I sought out that caterer and I said, why are you serving lamb? I mean, that's pretty expensive meat. And he said, well, it's simple. He said, I have a kosher store and I have another store that sells to the Muslims. And they both take certain cuts of meat, and we have these extra cuts that we can't get rid of. So he said, my son has a catering service. We sell the lamb through the catering service, which made perfectly sense. So then I asked him, I said, what does that specialty meat, the kosher meat, sell for? And he said, basically $25 a pound. Now, we're looking this year at fat lambs, And we're looking at less than $1 probably, maybe a little over, but in that range. If they sell the specialty meats for $25 and the retail price, what I see on the USDA website, is somewhere around $10 or $12, is the producer getting his share? I just think something's got to change here. I think it's corporate greed, to be honest with you. And that gets me into another subject. And I asked Bill, I said, do you mind if I discuss the Constitution a little bit in the sheep committee? And he said, well, make dang sure you have backup for what you say. And I got a book. It's called Formation of the Union. And it's the original minutes of the Constitutional Convention. It's got Franklin. It's got all of the founding fathers discussing things. And I think we ought to read that because I've read it. I've read several other books that pertain to that same thing. One of the things that I read that was absolutely fascinating was the book written, it's called The Writings of Washington. There's 17 volumes of it. I only read 2 volumes. But it's all Washington's comments, his speeches, his correspondence with foreign dignitaries. And it's also his prayers. And, you know, we a lot of times see Washington depicted as in prayer. He prayed regularly. And it's very interesting to read the prayers that he cited back there when he was president and before. Right along with that, he had a lot of comments to say about trade and the Constitution and what they could do with it. He also made the comment, with the forces that are arrayed against us, that if the American government can last 25 years, it will surprise me. Well, I'm glad we surprised him. But the Formation of the Union, that book, one of the things that I thought was very interesting in it, the whole thing, when they were discussing the Constitution of the United States, the biggest discussion was how they would put representation. They talked about the states and one state being bigger than others, another state having more population. How do we compensate that? So they wanted government to stay by for the people. And so they wanted to make the strongest leg of government the county commission. And they wanted that county commission to be jealous of their power. And they wanted them to have a representative in the state government to guard that authority that the counties had. The counties were supposed to be the heavily taxing part of the government. So they said, well, each county should have a representative. Let's build a branch of the government that is represented by the county in the states. That was the Senate of the states. Each county at that time, and this started out in South Dakota as well, was to have one representative called a senator. And that was supposed to be the means of guarding their power. The states were supposed to elect 2 senators out of the House of Representatives to represent them in the federal Senate. We've got away from that. And I believe that's part of the reason that we have a big problem with representing our property. So what does property entail? Yes, I understand it's land, houses, but what else does it entail? Does it entail our sheep, our livestock, our cattle? You know, there's many things as property. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Macomber versus Baltic Mining that income is property. And so how do we tax property? That was supposed to be left up to the lower government, the counties and the states. And we've turned that around, and by printing money and increased inflation, the federal government now controls the purse strings. And by doing that, they're controlling us. And I think that's a big, big problem. But anyway, I can verify everything I say partly because of that book, The Formation of the Union, and I would encourage you to get a hold of it. It's a House document. It was compiled by the Elder Lindbergh because he was afraid the actual discussion of the Constitution would get away from us. That was in 1926. And all I can say is it changed my ideas a lot of what the Constitution is supposed to represent and what we're supposed to be doing with it.